In this video, you're going to write code in the scenario where what you found is a directory. So first of all, let's delete our else statement. So whatever comes after this chunk of code will be executed if our file or our full static path corresponds to something that exists. So now we found something and we want to check if it is a directory first. So what you need to do, you can use a very useful method of FS called lstat. And we're going to use the sync version because we want to execute this code and wait for the output before we move on. So we will apply this method to our full static path. So FS is already included in our node modules. So we're fine with that. So let's see what this will return to us. So if I try this, now you can see that the app has crashed, and that's because this path does not exist. Okay, but we wrote some code which will just write this into our web page and then send a response.end. Well, unfortunately, this will not stop your code from executing. You will still execute the coming code. So to avoid that, you can add return false there. So if you do that, and you try, then this should be fine. Okay, and it just says that this does not exist, okay, and the app doesn't crash. But even though you do this, it's still not safe to do it this way. You still need to handle errors whenever you use a sync version of these methods. So to do that, you can use a try and catch statement like that. And if you get an error, you just console.log something like lstat sync error, and then you print your error. Okay. So let's save. And if we try again, we get only the first log. Perfect. Now let's try with a location that does exist. So I'm going to try projects, for example, /projects. Okay, so this is the stats object. So it contains many properties about the path. So one of those properties is the size, the last modified time in milliseconds. So this corresponds to the Unix time version, which you can obviously convert to a human readable format. Okay, that's another format of the modified or last modified time, and that's the birth time as well. So to check if the corresponding path is a directory, you can use a method of stat or the outputs of fs lstat sync, which is called isDirectory. So what we're going to do, we're going to store the output of this inside a variable. So let's call it stats. And I'm going to define it at the top like that, just for scope reasons. Then let's try console.log stats is directory. And let's see what we get. So we get true, and that's because that is a directory. And we're not sending any data, that's why you see this. So instead of console.log, I could try response.write and then response.end. And this time you will get that printed on the web page, but it doesn't work, and that's because we passed a boolean to our write method. Okay, and you can see it there. So you can only pass an argument of type string or buffer. So let's convert this to a string like that. So let's try. Okay, and we get true, meaning that we're getting a directory. Okay, and just a quick change. The variable here should be called stats. Basically, the code still worked because it's considered this as a global variable, because we started using it without using let, var, or anything else. So it's considered as a global variable. So it still works. Okay, so the next step now is to get our content from our template and then update the template with the correct title, breadcrumb, and table rows. So let's start by getting the content from the template. So for now, I'm going to write an if statement for the starts is directory output. So if starts is directory, we're going to execute the following code, which is this. Okay, so let's get the content. So let's see where our file is located. So it's inside static project files. So to get the content, we're going to read that file. So let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to create a variable data. Well, obviously it's going to change later, so I'm going to use let instead of const. And we're going to set it to the output of the read file function. So we're going to use read file sync just to make sure that we wait for the output before executing any common code. So now we need to read this file. So we need to get the correct location of that file. So what you can do, you can use the static base path, which is the path of the static folder, and then add to that project files /index.html. Okay, so to do this, you can use path.join of the static base path and project files /index.html. And we're going to use the UTF encoding. So you really need this, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so that's our data from the template. Now to start, you can just return this content and print it on the page. So to do that, let's just try this. So response.write data and then response.end. You can also set the status code if you like in the headers. So response.status code equals 200. So let's try this. And here we go. So this is our templates. All right. So you don't see any decoration at the moment. And that's because if you go to the page source, that's your CSS file. If you click on that file, it says file not found. And even if we found it, we still don't know how to read it. And that's the purpose of this project. We want to read files if we ask for them, or return the contents of folders. So at the moment, you won't see any decoration because you can't read the CSS file. But we are okay for now because we've got our HTML content. But we can still see the Bootstrap styling because we are using that from an external link, so that still works. So our breadcrumb, for example, is still working. All right, the next step now is to print the correct page title. So we're going to replace that string, which is inside our HTML template, with the correct name of the folder. So how do we get the name of our folder? We can get that from the path name. All right. So in this example, the path name is /projects, and your name, or the folder, or the name you want to use, or the title you want to use for your page is projects. In that scenario, for example, the name is this one. Okay. So we're going to get the full path name, and then we'll extract the name from there. So first of all, let's console.log the path name just to see what we've got. So that's our path name, /projects. Let's try with something a bit more complicated. So, okay, so let's try with this one actually. So that's our path name. Okay. So that's the name we want. So to do this, you can split this string, and your separator is going to be /. So splitting the string means that you're going to be creating an array made of these elements, which are separated by /s inside your string. So let's go ahead and do this. So let's create a variable called path elements, which will be the path name split using the separator /. And let's console.log this variable. So that's our array. So it starts with an empty element because we are starting with a /, so it still considers the first item as empty, and then the next one is projects, and then the next one. Now we want this one. So a good trick here is to reverse the array. So after you create this array, you can just reverse it using the reverse method. Now the name you want is going to appear at the beginning. Okay, so that's what we wanted, and now it appears at the beginning, so it's easier to get. Now, just in case, we will still filter our array and remove any empty elements like this one. So you can replace the path elements value with the output of the filter output. So path elements filter, and the function we're going to apply here for each element is going to be checking if the element is different from an empty string. So we need to make sure that we keep only elements which are different from an empty string. Okay, so let's try this now. And here we go. We got rid of any empty elements. And now the elements we want is the first one. So Let's call it folder name. And that's going to be path elements, element art index 0. So let's console.log this one and see. Here we go. We guessed the correct name. Let's try something else. Okay, we get the correct one as well. Okay, perfect. Now you will need to replace the string page title inside your template using the folder name. And to do that, you're going to use the replace method. So we are replacing page title. I've got only one instance, so it's pretty simple, with folder name. So let's try, and we get the correct folder name there. That's our page title. So let's try with the other one. Perfect. In the next video, you're going to build the breadcrumb for your web page.